In 2019, the Walt Disney Company, formerly known as Wacky Brothers Cartoon Enterprises, realized a vision to bring the worlds and characters from Star Wars to their theme parks across the globe. Disney and Star Wars were no strangers. Star Tours, a motion simulator ride that my grandma thought was a tour of the stars' homes, has been in the parks for over 30 years in 2 different iterations. The Season of the Force was a yearly celebration of the saga with meet and greets and other experiences, and some would argue that the Haunted Mansion takes place in the Star Wars universe because it has ghosts. But this new project was an entirely new land, one filled with adventure and thrills, that would complement the existing parks. In Orlando, Star Wars Galaxy's Edge would be placed in the Disney Hollywood Studios park. But this review is going to focus on the California version, which is located in Disneyland, which is located in California. Before the addition of Galaxy's Edge, Disneyland Park was made up of 8 sublands. Each land has its own distinct theme and aesthetic, which helps distinguish the different areas of the park. But when you're in each land, you're still in Disneyland. When you enter Tomorrowland, you're in a futuristic wonder world, but that wonder world is within Disneyland. When you ride Pirates of the Caribbean, you've been transported back in time to a Spanish wonder world, but you've been transported from New Orleans Square in Disneyland. The transitions are always subtle, but there's never a lost sense of time or place with these attractions. With the advent of Galaxy's Edge, this was all thrown out the window. Galaxy's Edge is located adjacent to Frontierland, in an area formerly known as Big Thunder Ranch. There are 3 separate paths to get in or out of the land. 2 are in Frontierland on the path to Fantasyland, and 1 is closer to the Bayou Country portion of the park. With all 3 of these paths inward, there is almost zero place setting done. The transition is subtle, particularly coming from the Frontierland paths, where the lighting fixtures and architectural details morph from Wild West to Star Wars. But at no point are you told where you are or why you're there. Of course, you know why you're there, but why is Star Wars there? The last major land addition to Disneyland before Galaxy's Edge was Mickey's Toontown, a cutesy toon-themed corner of the park dedicated to meet and greets and gentle rides to help relieve Fantasyland of some of the burden of entertaining tiny tots. But when Toontown opened, the Imagineers behind its conception and realization decided there needed to be a logical explanation for why this land suddenly appeared. The story went that Toontown existed as a vacation getaway, from when Mickey and friends needed to escape the drug-fueled paranoia of their Hollywood lifestyles. Since the 1930s, Mickey and his gang of hangers-on enjoyed their privacy there, until Mickey's good friend Walt showed him his plans for Disneyland and Mickey had him build it next to Toontown. 40 years later, the citizens of Toontown decided to open their homes up for visitors and the rest is history. Now, the Imagineers of the 1990s had a real infatuation with lore. I love this. I'm a huge fan of backstories and lore for rides or water parks or shops because A, it's fun, but also B, it forces designers to keep theme, cohesiveness, and consistency all intact throughout every square inch of the area. Isn't theme a big part of why we love theme parks? There's a sentiment from Mark Davis that people like to misuse when they refer to stories in the theme park medium. What Davis means isn't that story has no importance, but instead that theme parks are not the medium for a Joseph Campbell-esque hero's journey. Whether you agree or disagree with that sentiment, I disagree personally. I think rides like Star Tours and Indiana Jones Adventure are some of the best work Imagineering has to offer, and they follow 3-act structure, have inciting incidents, setups and payoffs, and limited character development. The point is, that story absolutely has a place in theme park design. Otherwise, you're just throwing a bunch of crap at a wall to see what sticks. And the placement of Galaxy's Edge in Disneyland feels a little like that. To the coveted first-time visitor who has no idea of what Disneyland has to offer, the transition into Galaxy's Edge may seem more jarring than going from, say, Tomorrowland to Fantasyland. Any sort of signage may help here. Even an inscription above an entrance tunnel reading "A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away" would help to at least establish a transition that's consistent with the rest of Disneyland as a whole. But I suppose Disneyland doesn't matter here. As I said before, each of the other lands exists in their own realm but are simultaneously pieces of the greater whole that is Disneyland. In Galaxy's Edge, Disneyland does not exist. You're on Batuu, a desolate and war-torn planet desperately scrounging to survive under the increasing pressure of the First Order's rule. It's an oddly unfun and serious affair that stands in stark contrast to the escapism and buoyancy of the other 8 lands. Batuu itself is an original planet, modeled closely after Tatooine from the original Star Wars film. This confuses me. There seems to be an impression among modern Star Wars creatives that people want to see Tatooine, that Tatooine is somehow the purest essence of Star Wars distilled into a single planet. I really don't understand this. Tatooine is meant to be a shit planet. The entire purpose of Tatooine, the reason George Lucas invented it, is to be so terrible that you have to empathize immediately with our hero's need to leave it. It's awful. And what's worse is that there have been so many cool and fun planets in the Star Wars canon that to have your first-class Star Wars theme park be set in the ruined rubble of an outer space Kabul seems like a massive shrug at best and a massive misunderstanding of what makes Star Wars at worst. There seems to be a trend in modern Imagineering where urban aesthetics have taken over for basic design, which allows them to make an area look like shit on purpose. Presumably so if things fall into disrepair, you'll have a harder time noticing. Now, I cannot say there isn't a story happening inside of the bubble that is Galaxy's Edge. Although you'd have to look this information up to know it. Galaxy's Edge takes place between episodes 8 and 9, and features multiple sub-stories that are meant to be dovetailed. Unfortunately, all of that information is missing. You're left to either guess or look it up. Once you're inside of Galaxy's Edge, you have a few paths to take that ultimately lead to the same result. Some shops and dining, a bar, and 2 attractions. When Galaxy's Edge first opened, it only had one single attraction, Millennium Falcon Smuggler's Run, a simulator ride that also integrated teamwork and interactive elements to create a high-tech and high-capacity version of a Dave & Buster's rail shooter. You enter the ride's queue just past the massive and fantastic recreation of the Millennium Falcon, shown to you in meticulous 360-degree detail. Once you're in line, you'll be waiting in darkly lit industrial warehouses full of scrapped ship parts and smuggled contraband. Where are we exactly? Onaka Transport Solutions. Why are we there? Well, we just are. The queue is mostly devoid of story, save for some radio chatter from a couple of obnoxious voices.
If I had an hour, I wouldn't be able to list half the things Hondo has done wrong today. We have to hide everything.
There's not a lot of story relayed here either, but that's fine because after some more waiting, you have a pre-show where you're introduced to the iconic Star Wars character, Hondo Onaka. But hold your applause because it's not really him. It's a very advanced audio animatronic, which looks really cool and has a great level of fluidity and articulation. Animatronics are a bit like video game graphics in terms of diminishing returns, but like going from Pong to Cyberpunk, going from Mr. Lincoln to Hondo is a huge leap, and makes the newer figure all the more impressive. It's just too bad I don't know who this guy is. And what's worse, I don't know if I should trust him. I mean, this guy has some seedy energy. He looks like one of the goons from Galaxy Quest, complete with weird turtle shell hat, and he's voiced by Jim Cummings doing an accent one could describe as having questionable sensitivity, and another could describe as Wakandan Tigger.
And engineers, you harpoon that precious cargo.
Hondo explains to you that you're there to help him smuggle some coaxium, and you'll be assisted by Chewie and the Falcon. Why he trusts us to do this, I don't know. It's not that important, but this isn't a passive dark ride experience. I'm being asked to engage, and to do that, I need to be engaged. The next step in the process is the role assignments. In 2003, Disney opened Mission Space. The general idea and execution of Mission Space isn't too far off from Smuggler's Run, but there's one difference that really changes the experience between the two: the roles.
They want you to take the roles!
When you sit down for your ride on Mission Space, you're assigned a role: pilot, commander, navigator, or engineer. And throughout the ride, Gary Sinise commands you politely but firmly to push whatever lit-up button is tied to your role. If you aren't quick enough, or you just don't care, or you get too distracted, Gary would repeat himself once, then the ride would perform the action for you. No harm. The ride always ends the same way, with the button-pushing element there to add a little more engagement for riders. In Smuggler's Run, 6 riders are assigned one of 3 roles: pilot, gunner, or engineer, with 2 riders for each role. The performance of the roles is much more integral to the enjoyment of this ride. The whole thing is basically a video game that requires each role to actively perform a task at a certain time. Pilots get the best job, naturally. They get to fly the ship with one rider moving up and down and the other moving left and right, and their performance in this role actively affects the other two roles. The gunners get to shoot guns, which sounds fun except for the fact that there's no way to aim at a target. Your lasers come out straight, so if your pilots are all over the place, you may not be able to hit much. Engineers certainly have the most boring job. At random intervals, you hit a button to shoot a harpoon, and that's about it. Maybe things would feel more fun if the gunners had a joystick, and the engineers had some small minigame to play whenever the ship got damaged. Unlike Mission Space, if a rider does not perform their assigned role, they will be thoroughly chastised by Hondo, and the outcome may be slightly different, depending on the timing.
Engineers, hit your flashing button! Harpoons quickly! You're running out of time!
Instead of everyone having the same ride experience, Smuggler's Run adds a score system for each ride vehicle, with the amount of smuggled goods getting you a better score, and damage to the ship costing you points. What these points do? Absolutely nothing. Plenty has been said about what Galaxy's Edge was supposed to have, and all of the budget cut business that happened, so I won't dive into it much. But the fact that they never bothered to alter the ending of the ride to exclude the score system is really bizarre. Sure, if you did well, you may get a little buzz from hearing Hondo congratulate you the way a deadbeat dad would at a soccer game.
Hey, not bad.
This is rare though, unless you or the majority of your crew are seasoned re-riders. This ride is an intentionally chaotic mess, with so much happening at once that any first-time rider I personally know has struggled to grasp the gameplay, instead primarily focusing on the story or the ride experience. If you're unlucky, or just normal, then your ride will end with the Falcon in shambles, Hondo angry at you, and a cast member who gives you a hard time as well.
And next time, pilots, fly lessons first, okay?
It's meant to be fun and funny in the grand scheme of the overarching plot that Disney canceled. Bad pilots might have had bounty hunters looking for them afterwards, or a bartender at Oga's who tells them that they heard about their misadventure. But instead, it leaves you feeling confused and kind of stupid. Not a great feeling, but certainly a consistent one in this land. As far as the story of the ride, it's about as formulaic as it gets, with a normal smuggling job that goes sideways and you and your crew ending up heroes for taking out a first-order manufacturing plant or something. There's no real sense of stakes or danger. Again, mostly confusion. And Hondo himself never really proves to be a likable character during the course of 15 minutes that you spend with him. There was a moment on my first ride, after you barely managed to capture the first of 2 coaxium batches, where Hondo swoops in and picks the batch up right in front of you.
Power up the ship. Well, I grab the coaxium.
The presentation of this moment, from the timing to the voice work, suggested for a brief moment that Hondo was betraying you, and your crew would have to help Chewie set things right. I was excited at this prospect. Giving you a slightly untrustworthy character and following through on his seediness? I love it. But sadly that wasn't the case, as Hondo was simply moving the plot along to the next batch of coaxium. There is a very funny moment where the designers stuck a huge column in your path when you re-enter Batu's atmosphere, making it almost unavoidable and a fun way to get a last laugh, which is a classic Imagineering move. Once it's all done, you're shuffled back out into the world of Batuu, where you have another adventure waiting for you, Disney's thrilling e-ticket masterstroke, Rise of the Resistance. Rise of the Resistance is meant to be the signature centerpiece of this Star Wars table setting. $450 million and half a decade of work went into this colossal effort, and it shows. The footprint of the show building and queue space is massive, and the intricate set design and technical effects that litter the show itself are mind-boggling. Rise of the Resistance continues the land's through line of a building conflict between the Resistance and the First Order, and things finally come to a head once you get involved. I think it's important to state up front that I believe Rise of the Resistance is a masterpiece of Imagineering. It has some of the most, if not the most, technically impressive effects I've ever seen in a theme park, and it checks almost every box in terms of leaving a memorable impression on the rider. But it's not perfect, and a lot of its imperfections work in overtime to overcorrect the things that WDI got so very right. You enter the ride's first line through a gorgeous outdoor queue that winds its way past serene plant life and cave formations. When I waited in this queue for the first time, I wanted to stand by the waterfall as long as I could, because I had forgotten how nice it is to have some natural kinetic energy in soundscapes. Small details that aren't too heavily composed of zooming spaceship noises or growling monsters. Further into the cave system, you begin to make your way through small rooms that suggest that there was once a teeming civilization here before wartime changed things forever. You know, this really isn't the kind of shit I like to think about at Disneyland. I get it. Again, you can't have Star Wars without wars. But when you're spending a good 45 minutes minimum standing in dimly lit rooms where Osama bin Laden filmed his manifestos, staring mindlessly at steel cages filled with artillery and flight suits, you start to wonder if this really is the best representation of the Star Wars brand. Remember Cloud City? Remember Naboo? Endor? So many more aesthetically pleasing options, but I get it. A cave system is more simple and cost-effective than a forest or the Palace of Fine Art. Oh. After you finally made your way through the lower intestines of the cave, you find yourself in the stomach, waiting to be digested, or to digest information given in the first pre-show. Hey, it's BB-8! Finally, a character from the movies I know whose name doesn't rhyme with Mumaka. BB-8 does a warm-up act and introduces Rey, who appears via a very cool-looking hologram that builds nicely on the same technology that fooled you into thinking Christopher Walken was actually talking to you at Universal Studios. Rey explains to us, the audience, that we're there as Resistance recruits, and that the First Order is on their way to Batuu in a Star Destroyer to raid the base. We're meant to get on a transport to rendezvous with Leia on some other planet, and off we go. Now, a lot has been made about the fact that the transport part of the ride is also part of the queue, and I think it's very cool. I'm not sure about the practicality, but the cool factor is all up in there. It's like a modern-day stretching room, except the stretching room was designed as a workaround to the problem of getting guests from one side of the Disneyland train tracks to the other. But it was such a cool effect that it's been replicated at every other haunted mansion, none of which have the railroad issue. The shuttle transport sequence may not exist to solve any issues with geography, but it does serve two important uses. It's a turntable system, so it can move a ton of people behind the scenes, and it's also a necessary step to bridge the gap between land and space. The whole point of this ride is to create the illusion that you're traveling into space. That's quintessential Star Wars, but in order to do so, you can't just walk into a room and be told, "You're gonna be teleported." Oh wait.
You made it!
You fly into space with a fun animatronic of Beck, one of them fish people like Admiral Akbar, and several hundred video screens showing you feeds of the X-Wing pilots guarding you, including a very convincing CG clone of Oscar Isaac. You watch as the pilots are murdered by TIE fighters, and then your ship is caught in a tractor beam, and the real ride begins, after several more minutes of standing in a new line. This moment, when your door opens up and you're greeted by an army of stormtroopers, is maybe the signature moment in this signature attraction that's full of signature moments. It's genuinely impressive. The army of space Nazis staring you down is cool, if not a little weird. Why are they just standing around like that? But this signature moment is also where the cracks in the facade begin to show a little for me. You have a First Order officer, a cast member in regalia, who opens the door and has to be in character, so the line they deliver is, Now, if the cast member delivers this line as intended, the result will be a laugh. It's meant to be cheeky. That's how most of the cast member interactions will go from this point on. They're all First Order villains who are meant to add a fun twist to those aforementioned classic elements of a theme park ride. I don't know if it's due to bad line delivery from the cast members or a genuine sense of malice. I wouldn't blame them. I mean, Jesus, look what they have to deal with. But there have certainly been points in my and people I know's experience where the interactions have gone a little too far in terms of the hostility. It reminds me a little of Dick's Last Resort, a restaurant franchise in the US where waiters and other staff are demeaning and surly to customers. And if people want to go to a restaurant where they're made to feel like shit, that's cool. That's their kink. But personally, I don't love it. I think a large part of the loss of the more fun attitudes of the first couple of years of operation was because of expectations that fell through. After COVID, Disney started cutting heavily into the performers' budget, shutting down plenty of live entertainment because they didn't want to pay for live actors or deal with their union. But with Galaxy's Edge, I think there was an expectation by Disney that hourly cast members working the land would be happy to have fun and play Star Wars simply for the privilege of getting paid to do so, not for any actual increase in pay to account for the new role. And so, what started as a fun and cool new way to entertain people has become yet another way to pinch pennies. And who wouldn't be annoyed at being a pawn in that scheme? So while it sucks to be barked at occasionally by a stink-eyed cast member, I can't really be upset at them for maliciously complying with their bosses, who are basically the first order of the entertainment industry. Anyway, a first order cast member barks at you for how many riders in your party, and then you're told to stand on a color, and if you don't move fast enough, they bark at you to move faster. Fun! You're placed in a holding cell with other members of your party, where more fun Pepper's ghosts threaten you with a good time. All of this is really cool, and the shadow work in particular is a great detail. The wall gets cut open, another great detail, and you're loaded into a vehicle and finally on the actual ride. Rise of the Resistance is trackless, meaning there's no track, meaning you theoretically cannot see what's going to happen next. In reality, there are only slight variations to the actual ride path. I long to see a trackless ride that really goes all out in terms of different paths or broader ranges of movement for vehicles, but I also understand that that's not really feasible. And while some rides integrate trackless technology for no reason other than to be trackless, Rise of the Resistance needed it because the entire selling point is immersing you in the world of Star Wars. You won't see any show lights or ceiling tiles or curtains here. It's all designed to be as three-dimensional as possible. The main issue I have with trackless tech is cosmetic. The track marks that the tires leave are incredibly ugly. There's a moment where you enter the first room of the Star Destroyer in your vehicle, and it's partially meant to be this small wow moment because there's no track. But the floor is so dirty from other vehicles that there may as well be a track. I understand that you can write this off by saying, well, of course they're dirty. They go in and out of there all the time. There's two passing by right now, see? But if you think the First Order would allow dirty floors on their premier Star Destroyer...
You've got some attitude, mister.
Everything else from this point on is perfect, though. Seriously. No notes, really. The pacing is excellent. The character moments are great. You really don't have to know who Kylo Ren or Rey or Finn are to know that they're bad guys and good guys. And the individual beats that Finn and Kylo Ren both get are really fun. There are non-stop technical effects happening all around you, and it's a miracle that most of the small ones work as intended a lot of the time. The scale of everything is perfect, and the fact that the ride goes from a dark ride to a drop ride to a simulator ride in the span of 10 seconds is something I never thought I'd see. I also love the disembark area, which is a nice lush green that looks very similar to Endor, a setting that I clearly have a thing for. As far as the rest of the experiences, you have a few options in the form of shopping and dining. That's about it. You may be able to get a reservation to Oga's Cantina if you're lucky, but you don't want to do that. It sucks. Even with a reservation, you have to wait in line. And once you're in, it's a dark and cramped experience where you feel like you can't relax. This was supposed to be the foyer for a larger dining venue. The fact that there hasn't been an effort to expand the space in any way is disappointing to say the least. Dining-wise, you have Docking Bay 7 and Ronto Roasters. I appreciate both because they both have vegetarian options. I would argue that the Ronto-less wrap is one of the best vegetarian options in all of Disneyland at the time of writing this. The atmosphere is also fun, with a robot droid rotating a skewered hunk of meat over a discarded pod racing engine. Ronto Roasters is also close to the marketplace, which is full of stalls with various Star Wars knick-knackery that's a cute attempt to match the knick-knackery of Hogsmeade, but pales in comparison. It's just missing that magic. There are no really fun effects to trigger here. There's a neat monster in the water bottle refill station, and one of the droids by the toilets lights up and boops if you do a thing on your phone. But it's nothing compared to the big smoke doors in Hogsmeade or any of that other crap. I'm actually a little torn on this aspect, however, because I do fundamentally disagree with the idea of paid add-ons like wands or bands being required to experience those things. And Disney tried to mitigate that a little by having people use a free app on their phones, but the end results just aren't worth it. I'd rather just pass through on my way to Frontierland, thank you very much. Ultimately, Galaxy's Edge isn't a huge miss, and I would never challenge anyone who says they love it or that it's their favorite part of Disneyland. Credit where credit is due. There is some really great work from the team who implemented the designs of the land. from stunning rockwork to very humble homes to great directional sound effects. Unfortunately, all of this fails to coalesce into anything more than the sum of its parts, which is a poor microcosm of the composition of Disneyland as a whole. And with Disney already struggling to maintain the time and place setting that's established in this land, I have to wonder what they have lined up next. I can only hope that we get some good dinner theater soon. Wait, not that!